When innocent Evelyn Mason sought help from the law, she was cruelly betrayed and sold as a fugitive. Influential figures hid behind authority, committing monstrous acts. But the lonely cowboy, Jacob Stone, uncovered the truth, and his fury changed the course of events. Discover how he exposed a corrupt network of crimes and why the villains got what they deserved. Facing unexpected retribution, rain poured relentlessly, turning Ridgeville's only road into a muddy, treacherous mess. Each step was a struggle for Evelyn Mason. Her boots sank into the thick mire, and her torn clothes, soaked through, clung to her chilled skin. Just hours ago, her world had fractured into before and after, an attack on the town's outskirts, shrouded by dusk. Now trembling uncontrollably, with hair plastered to her face and eyes wide with unspeakable shock, she stumbled toward the sheriff's office. Her mother's last words, whispered before she passed on to a better place, echoed in Evelyn's mind. "Seek the law's protection, my child. Only there will you find justice." Evelyn clung to that hope like a lifeline in a stormy sea. She truly believed that Sheriff Jones, a man with a reputation as an unyielding guardian of order, would right this wrong. Her words, her tears, her testimony, all of it surely had to be heard. Sheriff Jones, a heavyset man with cold, piercing eyes, listened intently to her desperate plea. He nodded, occasionally making notes in his worn ledger, and his stern yet seemingly reliable face inspired trust in Evelyn. "Don't you worry, Miss Mason," he stated in a deep, measured voice. "We'll get to the bottom of this. All those responsible will face justice. For now, you'd best spend the night here, in a safe place. We've got an empty cell. It's the most secure spot in town until we sort out all the necessary formalities." These words felt like a great weight lifting from Evelyn's shoulders. Exhausted, drained, but finally feeling safe, she experienced a wave of relief. The cell was cold and damp, but Evelyn closed her eyes, convincing herself it was a temporary sanctuary. Tomorrow, everything would be all right. However, morning brought not the anticipated justice, but a new, even more piercing shock. As the first rays of sun barely pierced the grimy cell bars, she was roughly awakened. But it wasn't Sheriff Jones. Standing before her was a stranger, tall, sinewy, with a predatory glint in his eyes and a greasy smile that sent an unpleasant chill down Evelyn's spine. "Ah, here's our runaway," he grunted, eyeing her up and down. "Been looking for you for a long time. $200 reward right into my hands." Evelyn flinched. The shock from his words was so immense that her heart seemed to stop. "A runaway? What runaway?" She frantically tried to protest, to explain that this was a terrible mistake, that she was a victim, not a criminal, but her words were drowned out by the crude, guttural laughter of the stranger and his companion standing behind him. And then she saw him, Sheriff Jones. He stood a short distance away, leaning against the doorframe, silently observing the scene. There wasn't a trace of sympathy in his eyes, just detached indifference. He had not only failed to come to her aid, he had personally handed her over to this man, confirming that she was supposedly a fugitive criminal with a bounty on her head. Her entire world, already shaken, collapsed completely, shattering into tiny fragments. She had been deceived, betrayed, used, and now she was sold like voiceless cattle. A profound sense of compassion for herself, for that naive Evelyn who had believed in justice and law, overwhelmed her. She realized with horror that she had become the victim of a monstrous, utterly revolting injustice. And this knowledge was heavier than any chains. Her they threw into a dirty wagon and drove east, towards the wild lands where the law was merely an empty word. Evelyn's new owner was a man named Sal, a human trafficker known for his connections to the darkest corners of the West. He treated her as property, not as a person, constantly reminding her of her new status as a fugitive criminal. Though Evelyn knew perfectly well she had committed no crimes, she was confined, hungry, and humiliated. But internally, she still clung to a tiny spark of hope. At the same time, several days' journey from Ridgeville, on his modest ranch, Jacob Stone was mending a fence when an old bounty hunter named Bill, an acquaintance of his, rode up. Bill, known for his honesty and disdain for injustice, was agitated. "Jacob, you won't believe what I saw," he said, catching his breath. "In Ridgeville, Sheriff Jones sold a girl to one of Sal's men. Said she was a runaway, but I saw her myself in town a couple of days ago. She was terrified and he just sold her. It's not like Bill to just throw words around. Sheriff Jones, he always seemed so principled. Bill's words hit Jacob like a physical blow. The shock of what he heard was staggering. Sheriff Jones, the man who symbolized law and order in their county? The thought that such a man could stoop to human trafficking was so monstrous, Jacob could barely believe it. But Bill wouldn't lie. Jacob imagined this girl, caught in the clutches of men like Sal. His heart clenched with compassion for the stranger caught in such a horrific plight. He knew he had to do something. This wasn't just about a missing girl. It was a blatant injustice that could not be ignored. He felt a rage begin to simmer within him, slow yet powerful, like an approaching storm. Jacob and Bill quickly prepared for their journey, their faces grim, their gazes resolute. Time was running out, and every minute could cost Evelyn her life. Their route followed Sal's wagon tracks, which fortunately were easily discernible on the rain-sodden ground. Jacob, an experienced tracker, unerringly determined their direction, despite the tricks Sal tried to use to throw off any pursuit. They moved tirelessly, like specters pursuing their quarry. Each mile covered only solidified their determination. Along the way, they encountered a few travelers and residents of small settlements, but no one wanted to speak of Sal or his merchandise. In every frightened glance, in every lowered eye, Jacob read fear and an unwillingness to interfere in such matters. This silence, this passive submission to monstrous injustice, only intensified his anger. Anger at Sheriff Jones, at the system that allowed scoundrels like Sal to thrive, and at the indifference that bred such collective silence. After several days, as the sun was beginning to set, they caught up to Sal's wagon at a deserted clearing deep within a grim canyon, known among locals as Thunder's Roost. The location was ideal for an ambush. High cliffs, winding trails, and a thick, approaching fog that was about to envelop everything. Only the crackling of a campfire and snippets of hoarse laughter betrayed the presence of Sal and his two henchmen. Jacob, armed only with his trusty Colt and a mind as sharp as a razor, quickly devised a plan. He knew he had to act quietly, swiftly, and mercilessly to prevent the outlaws from realizing what was happening. Under the cover of the thickening fog, they crept towards the camp like shadows. Through a gap in the wagon's dirty canvas, Jacob saw her, Evelyn. She sat, knees drawn to her chest, with a vacant stare that pierced his heart. This look solidified his resolve. Suddenly, Sal, sitting by the fire, abruptly raised his head. Perhaps he sensed something was amiss, or perhaps luck simply favored Jacob. Jacob acted instantly. He fired, aiming not at Sal, but at the sole kerosene lamp hanging above the outlaw's head. The lamp exploded with a deafening crash, plunging the camp into instant darkness and chaos. A disorganized gunfight erupted. Jacob moved like a phantom, using every bit of cover to disorient his opponents. He knew he couldn't give them time to understand what was happening, couldn't allow them to take aim. One of Sal's henchmen shrieked, falling to the ground, while the other, panicking, bolted into the darkness, abandoning his master. Sal, cursing furiously, tried to find Jacob in the pitch black, firing wildly. But Jacob was already near the wagon, ready for the decisive move. Jacob threw open the wagon flap, extending a hand. "Evelyn, quickly!" he whispered, his voice low and commanding. The girl, despite her weakness and the terror she'd endured, mustered her last reserves of strength and slipped out of the wagon, nearly falling into the mud. Bill, covering their retreat, masterfully distracted the enraged Sal, buying Jacob and Evelyn precious seconds. They fled into the night, never looking back, ignoring the bullets whistling overhead and the outlaws' furious shouts. The thick fog and impenetrable darkness were their only allies, concealing them from their pursuers. Having reached a safe place where they could catch their breath, Jacob and Bill finally allowed Evelyn to compose herself. Her story was horrific and shocking. Through tears and trembling, she recounted how Sheriff Jones, her last hope, had cynically sold her, forging documents to cover his illicit dealings. It turned out that Jones had long been secretly collaborating with Sal's gang, using his position to capture runaways, most often innocent people like Evelyn, and sell them into servitude. Her attack on the outskirts of Ridgeville had merely been a calculated pretext to lure her into a trap. Jacob clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white. His anger reached its breaking point, transforming into an uncontrollable desire for retribution. They returned to Ridgeville not for blind vengeance, but to deliver justice. With them, they brought not only Evelyn, whose words were now undeniable and filled with pain, but also an arsenal of evidence Jacob had found in Sal's wagon. Forged arrest warrants, incriminating letters from Sheriff Jones, detailed lists of merchandise with the names of other victims, and even accounting records of the sales. They handed everything over to the federal marshals, who had long suspected foul play in Ridgeville, but lacked sufficient evidence against the influential sheriff. Sheriff Jones's case became the most sensational in the Wild West in years. His name became synonymous with betrayal and vice. He was tried, found guilty on all counts, from corruption and abuse of power to involvement in human trafficking. He received the harshest possible sentence and was sent to the most remote federal prison, where he met his ignominious end, forgotten and despised by all. Jacob stood in the crowd, watching Jones being led away, and a deep sense of vengeful pleasure appeared in his eyes. Justice, though slow, had prevailed. Evelyn, having received some compensation and assistance from benefactors, began a new life far from Ridgeville, leaving the horrors of the past behind. Jacob returned to his ranch, knowing his fight had not been in vain. His story, whispered in saloons and around campfires, became a true legend, a reminder that even in the darkest and most forgotten corners of the Wild West, there will always be someone willing to fight for the truth.